This show is all about psychology, and today we're going to be learning about the master, Jung. Our good friend Jerome Powell, I think he's a listener to the show because I think what happened was we threatened the UBI thing yesterday, and simultaneous to this show, when we said, oh, we got this Nuremberg thing, it's going to be a UBI, and then Powell's going to end up in it. Well, simultaneous to that, now that he knows our plan, he mentioned yesterday to the world that it's possible to have more than one reserve currency. Wow. I mean, we're getting work done here. Things are actually happening. And I'm just checking my screen here. And I think that's amazing. And what we're going to talk about today is that's this version of assimilation. And it's a very important psychological concept, and we're going to be talking about it. So what Jerome Powell really just did was start to integrate Bitcoin into the American psyche, believe it or not. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. And the reason I even bring it up in this way is because Marty Bent, who runs a really popular podcast or show or interview, I've been watching it for a long time, it's great. He had a tweet about it, which was Jerome Powell spoke the unspeakable today and opened the floodgates of a decay in confidence in the US dollar as the global reserve currency. So that's Marty talking about what the chairman of the Federal Reserve said yesterday after watching our show and finding out that we had a prison for him. So it looks like we are going to let him out of the prison right now. And I think we have a job. So there's not the UBI. We're going to bring it up at the end where I think we can actually help Jerome Powell and America reach full assimilation of Bitcoin into the American psyche. So it's this piece that Marty Bent mentioned when he said, speak the unspeakable. And that reminded me of the Jungian model of the psyche. The Jungian model of the psyche is that we've got an ego and its opposite, the shadow. These are sort of bipolar in a way. And the argument here is that personal evolution, progress, all the reasons why someone goes to therapy are really about bringing all of these pieces of the collective unconscious, the shadow, into harmony with the actual perceived personality of that human being, the ego. So what we see is external objects, the inner world, consciousness, what he calls the collective unconscious, right? The collective unconscious. You'll hear about this a lot if you start going down the rabbit hole of Jung and psychology. And I bring it up in this way because what I see is Bitcoin and America having a very almost harmonious, almost twin core polarity, in that the ego and the shadow almost work off of each other. And by that, I mean the following. So we've got Bitcoin in America here. By that, I mean the following. The father of modern cryptography, Whitfield Diffie, the man who invented public key cryptography, and from which most of the technologies that we use today are derived, in partnership with several others, still does this conference every couple of years called the Cryptographers. And they bring them to Las Vegas. It's a huge conference now. And I actually interviewed Whitfield Diffie once on the subject because of something he said in the 2017 version of the conference. And in this conference, one of these other great cryptographers, Shamir, you hear about Shamir, Israeli fella, invented the Schnorr, parts of the Schnorr signatures that I think anyway, that we talk about a lot. And they were talking on stage. So it was Whitfield Diffie, the creator of public key cryptography, and Rivest, the creator of RSA and Rivest, all that stuff. So they're arguing about Bitcoin. And Rivest said to Whitfield Diffie, well, if these kids can just figure it out, they can either be a global reserve currency or they can be a cypherpunk revolution, but they can't have both. They can't be both. They were talking about Bitcoin and its ascendance in 2017. And Whitfield Diffie said, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on a second. America too has existed between these two dichotomies. America too has, in its entire history, oscillated between revolutionary force and imperial power, and never really had to choose. It can be both. It's always been both. But within revolutionary force and imperial power, you see both the ego, what America wants to be, and the shadow, what America is. And these two themes really are true about America. there's no denying it's a revolutionary force. Everything that comes out of American culture, the American attitude towards things, the irreverence to the past, the genocide of our grandparents' culture, each and every generation without any apologies, we celebrate it. But at the same time, it's hegemonic. American culture is cover fire for so much of the American way of life being imposed on others. And it's a natural aspect of life that the shadow has to be, dealt with. And it's dealt with, according to Jung in his therapy, according to this process called individuation. And it comes with three pieces: encounter, merger, and assimilation. When we see encounter really is just when the shadow personifying everything that the subject refuses to acknowledge about themselves. So we see that in American politics all the time, especially in foreign policy, especially in Latin America. The fruits of American imperialism are obvious there, and they can be clearly seen in monetary policy. So at once, America has created the conditions for which Bitcoin can grow in Latin America, simply because this encounter aspect forced America into its imperial role and didn't allow it to be the revolutionary force it believes it is. Or maybe the other way around, the revolutionary assumptions of America didn't really match up with the facts on the ground, the shadow, as it does subconsciously manifesting itself. And merging is really where I think we see ourselves now as a culture in America. And merging, what we see is the shadow can sometimes overwhelm a person's actions, and that's where shock and confusion and disarray can come from. And we can see that today in Ukraine and in Russia. And if you want no better example, you can have a look at the sanctions currently being proposed for India. So it looks like America is willing to sanction India over its inability to sanction Russia in coordination with America. And what does this look like to you? Is this America being a revolutionary force, seeing a power rising, getting through a lot of problems like India it is right now, and saying to them, well, now you've got to behave this way because it's convenient for us and our dollar, right? So sometimes this doesn't really work out. And one way to consider the merge aspect is this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde analogy. And the effect of the confrontation with the shadow produces kind of a dead balance and a standstill that hampers decisions and the ability to think in terms of the stimulation that's around you right now or the inputs that are around you right now. What we see there is what's going on with the war in Ukraine. America's never going to send soldiers there. It's trying its best to send money and weapons and everything, but it's not actually going to sacrifice human bodies. It doesn't really mean what it says about revolutionary force in that aspect. And if you look at where the attention already went yesterday, it was already back on State of the Union. There's other things going on in America. Today, it's Kanye West, who we're going to talk about in a minute. So Ukraine is kind of just another story already. And this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde piece of merger is important because the way to understand it is only Dr. Jekyll can merge with Mr. Hyde, the monster. And it's a funny thing. It's a funny thing. We're going to get back to this Jekyll piece in a second. So remember that. Remember this Jekyll piece. It's really important. We're going to bring it up again with Powell and Kanye West and the end of World War III, because I found it. I found where it is, or a sign of what it will look like. And now finally you come to assimilation. And that's when you begin to travel up through the healing spirals, straight up. And it's about a struggle to maintain the awareness of the shadow, but not identify with the shadow. And so when we see these two aspects of America, revolutionary force, imperial power, and we wonder, you can see stories, for example, like the following. You see politicians saying, well, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, it's just going to be another poor wealth distribution. Who got in first? It's all the tech people. And so what they're going to be, the rich people now, these coins can be racist. Bitcoin can be racist. It's being used by white supremacists. Well, here's something that came out today from Isaiah Jackson. He mentions a poll that shows that Black Americans are 41% willing to buy Bitcoin or have bought Bitcoin versus 30% for white American males. It's a big change. And what he writes is politicians who oppose Bitcoin and still expect the black vote will have to accept the narrative that the black lack of access is counterproductive. We went from being the least likely to the most likely to invest in Bitcoin in 5 years. Imagine what our community can accomplish in 50 years. Now you wonder why you have this piece of what we call projection. Projection is a huge aspect in merger. In this process of the individuation, when the shadow and the ego are duking it out and you're not trying to admit to parts that are wrong with you, the things in your shadow that you don't want to admit to, it's clinically observable that projection happens, that you accuse others of the very thing you're doing. We see that in elections in America, for example. Now, it turns out the Wisconsin court today mentioned a bunch of stuff about a vote, and you put a word FR in front of it, and then you got to put the rest of it called odd. I can't say it out loud here because this video will likely get censored. So I can't actually say the words of what the Wisconsin court actually found. I can't say them. I'm unable to say the words. But it's FR, and it's a bit odd. And it's saying that Zuckerberg did it. It's saying that Zuckerberg, big tech, did some stuff over there. And it's not just a little bit illegal. It was totally illegal, totally illegal. And then you wonder why there's all these calls in Washington, D.C. for voter reform. Why all these calls for voter reform? Was the system perfect before? Did we have it all figured out? And if you look at the narrative going just yesterday in the State of Union from defund the police to no, we meant fund the police. And by the way, everything about the elections is A-okay. They're really good, and we don't want to change them, but we do want to change them because electoral reform is the most important thing in America because we don't know. This is projection. I mean, this is absolutely projection. Ukraine, the whole situation in Ukraine, is it projection? Who stole what? The thing that was with the FR and the odd that might have been stolen. What happened there? We don't know. We can't even ask about it. We can't even ask about it. And that part of the process of bringing the shadow into the light is where we're at. And Powell got us started yesterday. Whether or not it's because he listened to the show and heard about the UBI punishment, or because he realized that the truth of the matter is the US dollar is not behaving as the global reserve currency anymore. And it's a bit like that whole world where we mentioned it the other day on the show about Bill Clinton telling the leader of the House at one point that the president is still relevant and the president is still powerful, or that I'm really famous, right? You can say you're really famous, but if you're telling someone you're famous, you're not. And it's a bit of that situation. And now that brings us to Kanye West. And it turns out that Kanye West made a video about the guy from Saturday Night Live, that he's had some really beautiful girlfriends, and now he's dating, I guess, Kanye West's ex-wife. And people are shocked because he made a video that shows, now I haven't seen the video, but the frame I'm going to use before I see it, I've seen a piece of it, the frame I'm going to use for the video is this. It's the individuation. I've only seen this part of it. So the video itself, I believe you might have to see the whole thing. I have not, I've seen this one part. What we see here is this facing of the shadow again. What we see is Kanye West saying, look, you've put this guy's face in front of, this guy's image in front of my face every day for the past, I don't know how many weeks with my ex-wife. I don't feel good about it. So to deny the shadow, to deny how you truly feel and not express it as an artist would and share it openly. Do you think Kanye West is actually going to decapitate somebody? Is that a reasonable solution? For him to mention he's going to openly and say, I'm weak, I'm a failure, I'm whatever, this is how I actually feel given this situation, I think is Jungian psychic model aligned. And if it is, what you have to start saying is that if Kanye is willing to go through this individuation process in public, and if we see America itself oscillating between these polarities, just like Bitcoin. Bitcoin can exist in this kind of harmony where the two poles of it are these two things. Bitcoin has an imperial force to it. You can't really argue with it. Bitcoin will, if the world goes this way, the situation is war comes to you. It's not that you choose war, and it's looking more and more like we're there. And so in the same way, if Kanye is willing to undergo this transformation of individuation in public, it's the same process. It's an analogy to what the country itself is going through. Now, I'm going to go back to the Dr. Jekyll piece for a second. And I'm going to remind everyone that the Federal Reserve was actually created on Jekyll Island. Weird, right? It was the simulation is telling us again, it was actually created on Jekyll Island in Georgia. And what I think about that, in the same way that in this merger period, only Dr. Jekyll can handle Mr. Hyde. It's not the other way around. Mr. Hyde cannot assimilate Dr. Jekyll. It's the opposite. I don't know if people really know what went on Jekyll Island historically, but this is an island of deep occult significance. I'm not going to get into occult mysticism here, but it turns out the island itself was used for human sacrifice before any of this stuff happened. Right? That's just a material historic fact. Whether or not the human sacrifice had any relevance to the foundation of the Federal Reserve and it being cooked there, I'm not going to say on this show. But nevertheless, the island itself, Jekyll Island, the creation spot of the Federal Reserve, pre Bretton Woods and all of that stuff, created the money trust in Georgia on Jekyll Island. For me, we will see the end of World War III when we got Jerome Powell looking for that job. Remember I said he's got to get out of the UBI prison? Here's the thing I'd pay for. I would pay, and I think it's the end of World War III, if we can get Kanye West, candidate for president perhaps, maybe even president by then, having a drink with Jerome Powell on Jekyll Island, talking about Bitcoin. If that ever happens, if we ever see Kanye West, Jerome Powell talking shit on Jekyll Island about their stacks of sats, World War III is over, the world's going to be A-OK, and we've undergone this process of individuation. America and Bitcoin have found harmony between being revolutionary force and imperial power. That's the show for today.